Okay, so today we're talking about cell energy, cellular respiration. And so if you recall from last week, cells have three main jobs. That cells make energy, cells make proteins, and cells make more cells. So we're starting off with cells making energy, and we're starting specifically with cellular respiration because all cells are able to do some form of cellular respiration. I've tried to make this a little less painful than usual. There's not as much to fill in. There are some animations in this presentation that you'll want to watch on your own, so be sure to make a copy of this presentation and so you can watch those animations for yourself. We're not going to watch them within the presentation here. So first off, we get our energy from the things that we eat. So we consume materials, our bodies break them down, and by breaking down those molecules into simpler forms, we are also creating a high energy molecule called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And we're going to talk about how the foods that we eat get converted into ATP. And so this should be somewhat familiar. You've probably seen this one before. So we have a chloroplast on top and a mitochondria on the bottom. And so remember, all eukaryotic cells have mitochondria. So a mitochondria utilizes organic molecules, so food, things that we eat, and oxygen. And as a waste product, they produce carbon dioxide and water. On the other hand, a chloroplast utilizes carbon dioxide and water, and through the catalyst of light energy, forms organic molecules and oxygen as a waste product. And so both of these processes also make ATP, and this ATP is basically the energy that your body uses to do work. So this is a diagram of ATP. Oh, it's not going to animate. These red bonds here are high energy bonds, and when they are broken and release a phosphate group, it also releases a large value of a kilojoule value of electric energy to your cells to do work. And so that bond is broken by hydrolysis, so water is added to break that bond, and when that bond is broken, it releases energy into your body to do work with. So if you've ever seen that movie, The Matrix, where it talks about humans being little batteries, well, it's true. So every single cell in your body produces ATP. Every molecule of ATP, when broken, releases electrical energy to your cells so that they can function. Also, your brain, your synaptic pathways use basically an electric current to carry information. So we have this electric energy in our body so that we can function. And so this is the overall equation for cellular respiration. This is, the broken down simple version, but we have glucose and oxygen. So C6H12O6 is glucose. So we have one molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen. And through this process, we're going to create 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and ATP. So this reaction is called a redox reaction. And so redox reaction comes from the terms oxidation and reduction. So in a substance that's oxidized is anything that loses electrons. So it has become oxidized when it loses electrons. You are reduced when you gain electrons, and that might sound counterintuitive, but basically if you are gaining electrons, your charge is now more negative, so you have a reduced charge value. So I know that's kind of funky, but it works. And so during cellular respiration, our bodies are using oxygen as the final electron acceptor. So oxygen is going to become reduced and form water. And as a byproduct of this process, we're going to see we form a large amount of ATP. And again, that's the overall equation. So again, you can see that this carbon here has become oxidized because it has less things that it's holding on to. So it has no more hydrogens, and we're really looking at those hydrogens as those electrons. And then here, this oxygen becomes reduced because it has gained these hydrogens. And so cellular respiration in eukaryotic cells takes place in 3 steps. We have glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. This is just kind of a general overview of the 3 steps. So glycolysis just happens in the cytoplasm of a cell. So actually all cells are able to do glycolysis, even bacteria. Since it happens in the cytoplasm, it is an anaerobic process. It does not need oxygen to happen, but it's also very inefficient. We're only going to generate a very, very few number of ATP for 1 molecule of glucose. And so in a eukaryotic cell, the byproducts of glycolysis would be further broken down in the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is also called the citric acid cycle. This happens within the mitochondria, and it doesn't make a whole lot of ATP either. The main big thing in the Krebs cycle is going to happen that it produces carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide that you exhale comes from this step. And then finally, really a lot of what the Krebs cycle is all about is making these high energy electrons to be transported to the electron transport chain, the final step. So the ETC, the electron transport chain, also happens within the mitochondria. This is the best, most efficient step of cellular respiration. Without the ETC, our cells would not be able to be nearly as effective as they are. And so, on your slides, this is all in one. I'm going to kind of go through step by step a little bit. So glycolysis, again, we have it's happening in the cytosol or the cytoplasm of the cell. We are taking in glucose, a 6-carbon molecule, and we're making pyruvate. We're actually making 2 molecules of pyruvate. It is a 3-carbon molecule. We're making a little bit of ATP through something called substrate level phosphorylation. That's basically we're taking ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and a free phosphate group and just attaching them together like Legos. Okay, so very just a straightforward process. We're also making some of this stuff called NADH. So basically NAD becomes NADH. We're adding on a hydrogen, that high energy electron. The leftovers from glycolysis, again, are going to be further broken down. So pyruvate is going to be used, it's going to be converted into acetyl-CoA, and then I'll go into the citric acid or the Krebs cycle. Same thing, just 2 names. And then these high energy electrons that are produced from both cycles are going to be shuttled all the way over to the electron transport chain. Again, that electron transport chain is the most effective use of our 1 glucose molecule that we started with. This all happens to that 1 glucose molecule, and we make ATP. So think about when you eat, you're not eating 1 glucose molecule, you're eating thousands upon thousands of glucose molecules at a time. So your body is doing this with all of that energy that you are giving it. Again, go back and watch the animations, make a copy, and watch those animations. So we're going to kind of break down things a little bit here. So glycolysis, again, is the beginning step. All cells are able to do it because it happens in the cytoplasm. There is a series of 10 steps. We're not going to learn them. But basically, the 6th carbon molecule of glucose gets broken into 2 3-carbon molecules called pyruvate. Also, we have ADP is converted into ATP by adding on a phosphate group. and we have that NAD plus becomes NADH. Again, that hydrogen is that electron, so this NADH is basically a fancy taxi cab that's carrying this hydrogen to its final destination at the electron transport chain. Here are those 10 steps. So the important thing to notice here is that to start this reaction, we have to invest. We have an investment of 2 ATPs in order to phosphorylate our glucose molecule. Once phosphorylated, that glucose splits into 2 molecules of 3 carbons each. And through another process here, we have that each molecule will produce 2 ATPs. So we're going to get 4 ATPs out of this process, 1, 2, 3, 4, but we had an initial investment of 2. So not a very effective process, but we have to have this process to get things started. It's kind of a jump start for our eukaryotic cells. And that's the whole 10-step overview. Yay. Okay, again, go back and watch these animations. So as I said, we make 4 ATP in this process, but with that initial investment of 2, we only net 2 ATP. We're only positive by 2. And so for organisms that are anaerobic, this is a process that they use. Bacteria are able to do this. Yeast are able to do this process. But it's very, very simple and an inefficient use of glucose. If you're only doing glycolysis, you're taking that 1 molecule of glucose, but you're only making 2 ATP with it. So it's not a really great turnaround. So for us, being eukaryotic, we have this fancy organelle called the mitochondria. And so we are able to do aerobic respiration with this process. And so aerobic, go back to your root words. So ic is the condition of, or pertaining to, and aerobe, or aero, is for oxygen. And so this is an aerobic process, so pertaining to oxygen. And so glycolysis made that molecule called pyruvate. And it still has energy within that molecule. And so eukaryotic organisms are able to further break down this pyruvate, and we're going to make something called acetyl-CoA. So this kind of describes what happens to pyruvate in order to make acetyl-CoA. So essentially we have a carbon dioxide molecule removed from pyruvate. The leftovers from that reaction join up with a cofactor and form this complex called acetyl-CoA. And this is what that process looks like. So glycolysis happens, we make pyruvate. Pyruvate gets broken, it loses carbon dioxide. We have some of these high energy electron carriers come in and strip away some hydrogens. This coenzyme A comes in, and we have this funky little reaction happen, and so we finally make acetyl-CoA. So you'll notice down here at the bottom, acetyl-CoA can have 2 destinations, either ATP or fat. And so basically your body has to make a decision as to, do I need energy right now or do I need energy later? Remember that fat lipids are an energy storage area. And so if I need energy later, this acetyl-CoA is going to form fat. If I need energy right now, and my body is going to make ATP with it. So basically, if your body is under stress, you're doing some kind of physical activity, your body is going to create ATP. And so the acetyl-CoA will go into the mitochondria, and it'll continue to the Krebs cycle and make more ATP. But if your body has sufficient amounts of ATP, like you're having movie marathon day with your bag of popcorn and bucket of M&Ms, or you're playing video games and drinking your monster drinks, that's a whole lot of calories that your body is consuming without a sufficient amount of energy expenditure. And so your body, it might use some of that for energy, but not all of it. And so all those calories that you're taking in are just going to get saved on your body. Your body is not wasteful. And so if you are giving your body calories, and your body thinks that it needs those calories, and so it's going to save it for later. Your body is not going to get rid of a resource that you are giving it. So the Krebs cycle, we see it here. And so remember, we made 2 pyruvate molecules, so this one is just showing 1 at the top. So this whole process actually happens twice, once for each pyruvate molecule. This happens within the mitochondria, so down here is that mitochondria, but it happens specifically in an area called the matrix. And the matrix is this fluid-filled space inside the membrane. And so remember that theory of endosymbiosis. Remember, a theory in science is much different from how you would use the word theory in an everyday language. So it was a hypothesis, but it's been shown over and over and over again to be true, so it becomes a theory. And so this again harkens back to that idea of that this mitochondria is similar to a prokaryotic cell structure, having this fluid-filled inside that's very, very similar to cytoplasm. And so in this process, from glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, so far we have 4 ATPs, we have 10 NADHs, and 2 SADH2s. So remember, these guys down here, those are those high energy electron carriers. They're carrying those hydrogens that have been stripped off of other molecules, and then they're going to be deposited at the electron transport chain. So here the electron transport chain occurs within the cristae of the mitochondria. So the cristae are those folded membranes of the mitochondria, that inner and outer membrane fold. And within that membrane, there are different proteins, or cytochromes. And each protein is going to pass the electrons from one protein, one cytochrome, to the next. And as those electrons get passed along the chain, they finally get passed to oxygen, and this is where we form water. Also, there's a very, very special protein called ATP synthase. And so ACE is an ending for enzymes. And so it's ATP synthase, so it's an enzyme that builds ATP. And so as the protons move through the ATP synthase, this is going to catalyze the production of ATP. And so what we have happen, we have NADH. NADH drops off its hydrogen, and it leaves as NAD+. This hydrogen, you can see that this is positive, and here we have a negative electron. So remember, hydrogen is the simplest atom. It is 1 proton and 1 electron. And so essentially, we have the electron of a hydrogen and the proton of a hydrogen being separated. And so this electron part continues to get passed on from one protein complex to the next until it reaches down here with water. Along this way, the hydrogens, the proton part, is being pumped to the other side of the membrane, and it can only re-enter through that special enzyme ATP synthase, and that is going to make the ATP. And so this ATP synthase is going to work by something called chemiosmosis. And so we'll have oxidative phosphorylation. And so we'll take a look at this. We have an animation that we're actually going to watch. Oh. Okay, I'll try to repost this animation. This one's actually really, really good. So I'll try to see if I can get it to work. And so at the end of everything, we have 2 ATPs from glycolysis with some of those high energy electron carriers. We get 2 ATPs from the Krebs cycle, a lot of electron carriers. And at the end of the electron transport chain, we get a lot more ATP. And so depending on the cell, how efficient it is at this process, we're going to get somewhere between 30 or 32 ATP from one glucose molecule. And again, the step that gave us that big punch is the electron transport chain. And so that is really the step that is very essential to our cell's ability to make ATP and be efficient at producing energy. So there are cases in which a cell does not or is not able to do aerobic cellular respiration, so they are in an anaerobic state, and so they don't have oxygen available, and so this is typically termed fermentation. And so fermentation is making ATP only by substrate level phosphorylation. So that's like taking 2 Lego pieces and putting them together. It's inefficient, it's not very productive, so cells that do this process are typically single-celled, or our bodies also do a fermentation process that's not very good. It actually produces a toxic substance to our cells. And so there are so many different kinds of fermentation, but we're just going to focus on 2 that eukaryotic cells perform. And so alcoholic fermentation is performed by yeast, and in this process, pyruvate is converted into acetaldehyde, and then it will eventually end up being ethanol. And so this is a product that we use in the brewing industry. So yeast are actually really important in a lot of industries. So any kind of baking or brewing industry really relies on yeast being able to ferment well. Lactic acid fermentation is something that happens in our muscles. So whenever we deprive our muscles of oxygen, they start to cramp. And that cramping is due to the production of something called lactate. And so basically, if you've ever been running really hard and suddenly you get that really sharp pain in your side, that sharp pain is from lactic acid. And basically, the way that you're breathing and the way that you're moving, your body is not delivering oxygen effectively to all of your cells. And so it causes a form of anaerobic fermentation to happen instead of cellular respiration. And so that causes the production of this toxin, the lactic acid, that causes you to have that muscle cramp. Now eventually your body will clean it up, it'll get rid of all the toxins on its own, but for a while that's going to be a slightly damaged muscle. So this is just a comparison of ethanol, of alcohol fermentation and lactic acid fermentation. Again, cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration, is just much more effective use of that glucose molecule. So here we have obligate and facultative anaerobes. Obligate is that they will die in the presence of oxygen, so there are some organisms that cannot be around oxygen or else they will die. There are facultative anaerobes that, depending on their situation, they will either be oxidative, cellular respiration, aerobic cellular respiration, or they will be fermenters. And so the whole point of you breathing, the whole point of you taking oxygen into your body is to be able to do aerobic cellular respiration, to make energy. So as long as you are breathing and getting oxygen to your cells are making energy. When your body stops breathing and stops getting oxygen to those cells stop making energy and your cells die. So death is essentially the ceasing to produce ATP, the ceasing of energy. So here, there are many pathways by which your body can make energy. The simplest to talk about is using carbohydrates, because it's just a very straightforward process here. But we can use fats as a method of producing energy. We can also use proteins and even nucleic acids as a way to get energy. So everything that you consume has the potential to give you energy. Okay, so I will see if I can get that animation to play again. So you have a lab demonstration later this week, so be sure to look over and print that sheet. You also have a cell study assignment, so be sure that you are working on that as well. Y'all have a good week.